important to me is the fact that today is also Trump's address, or the date that he's going to address a joint session of Congress, which promises to be very spicy. And we are thrilled today to be joined by our friend, Professor David Clements. We initially reached out to him to talk about President Trump's directive to the bipartisan gathering of governors, and that it's time to move from paper ballot elections and have trustworthy elections. That seems like it was, I don't know, a decade ago now. And since then, there have been big developments with Tina Peters' case, thank God, and with some J6ers as well. Before we dive in, let me read the scripture of the day and follow along if you are able to do so. It's Matthew chapter 13, verses 10 through 16. And his disciples approached Jesus and asked, "Why do you always speak to people in these hard to understand parables?" He explained, "You have been given the intimate experience of insight into the hidden truths and mysteries of the realm of heaven's kingdom, but they have not. For everyone who listens with an open heart will receive progressively more revelation until he has more than enough. But those who don't listen with an open, teachable heart, even the understanding that they think they have will be taken from them. That's why I teach the people using parables, because they think they're looking for truth. Yet because their hearts are unteachable, they never discover it. Although they will listen to me, they never fully perceive the message I speak. The prophecy of Isaiah describes them perfectly. Although they listen carefully to everything I speak, they don't understand a thing I say. They look and pretend to see, but the eyes of their hearts are closed. Their minds are dull and slow to perceive, their ears are plugged and hard of hearing, and they have deliberately shut their eyes to the truth. Otherwise, they would open their eyes to see, and open their ears to hear, and open their minds to understand. Then they would turn to me and let me heal them instantly. But your eyes are privileged, for they see. Delighted are your ears, for they are open to hear all these things." And I got this strong sense this morning, even before reading that passage, that the Lord is preparing for a massive wake up call. And as strange as that sounds, after all we've been through these last 5 years, we all have friends, we all have family who are sound asleep to the truth. And Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man can come to the Father except by me." And he sent us the gift of Holy Spirit, who leads us into all truth. And I've said it here quite a number of times before, but I'll just keep saying it. Any truth leads to Jesus. If you've watched people's testimonies over the last several years, you know that it was some spark of truth, whether it's about child trafficking, about the jabs, about the 2020 election, or any other real physical world truth. It was a physical world truth that has already led many people to Jesus who were not close to him. And I believe that we're going to see more and more of that. So let me encourage you today to ramp up your prayers that your loved ones, your friends, and your neighbors would have their eyes, ears, and hearts opened to the truth, because we know where the truth reigns, there is liberty.
Ramp up the prayers. I
Yeah.
love that, and put our Lord first. You know, one of the things, Danielle, that I've noticed in my own prayers is that two things block sometimes God's grace in my life. One is pride, and there's a reason why pride is the first among the cardinal sins. Human pride can impede the grace of God in our hearts, and also the tendency to get discouraged and feel as though what we're doing is not making a difference. And you know, the devil can inject pride into us, and also a sense of discouragement. So it's very important that we recognize those things in our prayer and take those things to God, because He will, as Jeremiah said, Danielle, and as you alluded to in the prayer. Uh, Call on me, he says, and I will hear you, and I will show you deep and majestic and beautiful things that you know not. I love that from Jeremiah. But someone who certainly is in touch with the Lord, or probably would not be standing, uh, much less progressing and prevailing in many things, is David Clements, a frequent guest on our show. David, what a pleasure to have you on the State of Freedom once again, sir.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's always good to be with you.
Yeah. I want to talk right at the outset here about paper ballots. Seems to be controversy all over the country, confusion, misunderstanding. But President Trump, multiple times recently, has called upon an all paper ballot system. He's not specifically called for hand counting, but he has called for an all paper ballot system. Most recently, at his first cabinet meeting, I want to play a clip, a short clip of President Trump talking about an all paper ballot system, recommending it to the states, and then get you to comment on it.
Great.
All right.
It probably did affect the election. I mean, we won by a lot. As I said, too big to rig, but it probably did affect the election. You know, probably could have won by more, but I could have lost the election because of that. It's we have to get to honest elections. We have to go back to paper ballots. We have to go back to voter ID, one-day election ideally, or short term, not these 48-day and 61-day elections where boxes are put in a room and, oh, let's move the boxes because we're putting in a new air conditioning system. Then you see the boxes move and then you say, well, where are all the boxes? You know, what happened to the boxes that never came back? Now, our elections are extremely dishonest. We're the only country in the world that has mail-in voting and all of these different things that we put in. No other country in the world has it. You know, France went to, they had some of the things that we had, and they went to same-day voting, all paper. And you know, paper is very sophisticated now. It's a very sophisticated form of voting right now. It's a very safe form of voting. You know, the other things for the governors, I wish the governors would do it because the paper ballots will cost 9% of the machines, and they're 100%. You know, nothing's foolproof, but they're as close as you get.
Seems pretty clear, huh, David? One of the things that jumped out at me about his statement was his explicit reference to France and the system that France uses. What are your thoughts on President Trump's statement there?
Well, I'm encouraged, but you know, one of the things that people need to realize is that um, almost every state uses paper ballots, and so the question isn't so much about whether paper ballots are going to be used. I know Louisiana is kind of like the worst of the worst when it comes to the election systems, but most states have a paper ballot that's being submitted through a tabulator. And he's being very, very delicate in his messaging. And I think he's actually understating the risks because I'm sure he's going to continue to message this issue. I'm happy that he's talking about it already. But I'll tell you what really encouraged me was the meeting that he had with the governors at the White House about a week prior to the video that you just played. And you can tell that he's on the same page with what I'm saying right now because he says, well, and we got to talk about the machines. We got some very, very smart people. And he named Elon Musk as a reference saying we can't use these machines. Um, but right now, there are a lot of the way that it was messaged, at least in that hearing, a lot of people are going to come back and say, well, we already do. So what's the big deal? So I think there needs to be a clear articulation that we need these hand counted, that privacy only extends to the ballot box itself. And after you're done filling out your selections and you drop it into a transparent case or tank, what have you, that it's a public record that needs to be um, uh, there for everyone to see. Um, the other thing that was interesting is just looking at body language. I really liked Pete Hegseth nodding his head, affirming Marco Rubio, kind of sitting there disinterested, so food for thought on whether or not he thinks it's a big deal. And then I think I still have questions about France. I don't, people have to realize that there are ways to circumvent and subvert any type of election system. But what you're trying to do is get away from what we call level three, which is the nation state vulnerability aspect, where you can use software and machines to change results and get it back to level one or level two. You're always going to have level one and level two, which is basically voter fraud, individuals doing things that they shouldn't be doing. That's level one. And level two is a person that holds a position of trust, like a clerk, doing things behind the scenes. That's always going to be there. And I think Trump indicated that in that meeting. But the messaging's there. He's also talking about the hope that the states will get involved, and that's a slight tell, and which tells me he's ready to do something with respect to federal races. He's not just throwing this out there, hoping that state governors like Kemp, like Ducey, like all of these people that have been part of the cover up. Let's be clear, they're part
Yeah.
of the cover up. So I think if you're going to analyze this from like a triage standpoint, what can you control? Well, you can control the next big election next year, which involves House races and Senate races. And he needs to keep the House and the Senate to make sure that his administration doesn't go off the rails. And so, to the extent that you can have a very simple ballot, let's say that everyone fights back and says, we want nothing to do with what Trump's doing. Well, fine. Um, but you're going to have to administer your elections and obey the federal laws. And there's some things that he can do through an executive order in particular um, that will require the states to give effect to the federal law. And more importantly, the leverage that he has is HAVA. Most states, even though they're in love with these machines, they need to realize that the federal money is what um, allows them to use the tabulators and this ecosystem that's just full of fraud. And if Trump and his prerogative, under his own prerogative, wanted to say no more funding because we found evidences that this affects our national security, states are going to be scrambling in short order to get something. Um, they're going to need to search the coffers, and that actually happened in New Mexico recently, where Maggie Toulouse Oliver was scratching her head over the cutting of funding through CISA and some of the manpower at CISA. These are the people that were in charge of, um, monitoring disinformation and misinformation, right? So the collusion and the censorship regime. And she brought up something that was very, very important, was that the funding for the Albert Sensor program, these are the computers that reside behind county and precinct firewalls. This is a huge aspect of the cheat where DHS can monitor all of your data real time. And now she's looking for funding outside of the federal government. So there's a lot to unpack, but you have to read between the lines because one of the things I've noticed about Trump is he'll get you there. He doesn't he doesn't show his cards very often, and so the messaging was spot on, but we've got a lot to do.
We do have a lot to do. And as you were talking, the imagery came to my mind of, okay, these state officials scrambling for funds. And I'm reminded that basically no ballot measure in Louisiana for us to tax ourselves more has ever failed. That should be a tell that the system is rigged, right? So I could see them putting forward a ballot measure in the state of Louisiana saying, okay, well, we need $100 million so you can press a different button when you come on this 1 or 2 or 3 times a year. Um, and then they rig it so that we ourselves agree to pay the stupid $100 million to defraud ourselves out of our vote. So we do have a lot of work to do, David. We have a whole lot of
Yeah.
work to do. We have a lot of screaming to do, a lot of public pressure to
Yeah,
exert.
well, and people just want to spend money. I mean, if there's
Yeah.
As long as it's not theirs.
yeah, if there's an RFP on the table or something to get a new system, I know that in Louisiana, I think there's about $100 million
Yeah.
that they want to spend, and they're not thinking in terms of what Trump just said. But we've got $100 million. Let's throw it at a vendor, and if we can manufacture optics that suggest that we're doing better than what we were before. And my following of Louisiana was, let's take the worst system and replace it with arguably the second worst system. So Louisiana, outside of a small category of using paper ballots in like for absentee purposes or military personnel, it's you don't even have the fiction of having the piece of paper to feed through a
Yeah.
tabulator. So They've been talking with a lot of folks in Georgia and Florida that have the barcode technology, which is another problem. So you can touch the screen through a ballot marking device. It'll generate a piece of paper that has your selections on the paper, but also on that paper is a barcode. So when you submit it through the tabulator and it's reading and scanning that ballot, common sense will dictate, what is it reading? Is it reading the barcode or is it reading the selections? And the fact is, no one knows. And the curling case in particular, there were efforts to get rid of the ballot marking devices. And so there's this evolution to go to something that's it's a lot of political theater. You're not going to be in any better position. And
Yeah.
just so people know, I live in a state where we don't have the ballot marking devices. We don't have the QR code, but we still have easy ways to subvert our system, which uses paper ballots and no barcode. And so the complexity of the system is what allows bad actors to do a lot of busy work in the regulatory space, at the technology. And at the end of the day, you have wide open systems. And until you get to closed system architecture, it's just way too easy. It's way too easy to cheat. And he knows that. I thought that was a pretty cool thing for him to say. Hey, it could have gone the other way.
Yeah.
You know, that was a very, very honest statement. And many of us have scratched our heads on how in the world he got through 2024. And I've talked with a lot of experts that there appears to have been an intervention that stopped election night reporting from demonstrating that giant F curve in places like Pennsylvania
Hmm.
and in Georgia. And then there were also cease and desist operations where people were driving up to voting locations with ballots and they were stopped. And so it was through neutralizing the F curve in election night reporting and the mail in ballot operation that he was able to get through those essential states. But, make no mistake about it, that didn't happen in every state. And when you're left with this popular vote nonsense that he eked out a 2 million vote victory, 77 million to 75 million, does anyone really believe that? And so I still think, if you had that hand marked ballot that was counted by people that are in your community, you probably would have seen a 90-60 split. And I'm not exaggerating. I really believe that the numbers, the people that I talked to, are saying that's probably closer to a 90-60 split, maybe even better for Trump.
Yeah. David, if we get a federal directive, either in the form of an executive order or in the form of congressional legislation, because I believe that there is some proposed congressional legislation now regarding securing the elections. Article 1, Section 4 of the United States Constitution gives the states power over time, manner, and place of elections. But there's also a provision in Article 1, Section 4 that allows federal oversight, congressional oversight over that process. I think it's the last clause in that provision. Um, to what extent could the argument be made that the feds do not have the authority uh, to regulate or to engage in the administration of state elections? So the federal legislation or a federal directive may not be applicable or binding on the states.
Look, I'm a big proponent of the 10th Amendment, and so I'm kind of in a weird spot where I want to just say, hey, states' rights. And I think some of John Eastman's arguments were especially powerful because he was the one that was telling people that, look, if you've got evidence of fraud due to the provisions that you just mentioned, Chris, that you don't have to release your delegates to be certified on January 6th if you've got evidence of fraud because they weren't regularly given. That was, I think, the language in one of the cases. Um, However, you still have federal races themselves. So I think what you do is you parse the lines. Like, yeah, there's got to be some oversight. Um, and I don't think you have to do a strained analysis of the Constitution. I'll give you, one quick example that comes to mind, which is the 14th Amendment. equal protection. So if you've got a race that everyone shares, which would be the presidential race, there are arguments that are facially there that where the states need to be able to regulate one another and determine whether or not you've diluted the votes of your respective state because you're not following the law. And that's what happened in Texas v. Pennsylvania. It was basically an equal protection argument. And so there's got to be interplay. I don't think you can say that this is a state's issue primarily, or a federal issue primarily, that they're kind of checks and balances. And so that's why I said earlier that to the extent that you're just dealing with state races, municipal races, and you want to fashion a standalone day where you're just doing nothing but the tallying of state races, I think there's really good arguments that the states can tell the federal government to go pound sand, and that's fine. Um, the problem that they run into, though, Chris, is that they have they've decided to combine federal races to the state races,
Yeah.
and they do that in order to help generate enthusiasm for get out the vote efforts. And so they're going to have to exercise a degree of discipline on their own end for them to have those states' rights arguments. Otherwise, if you're going to combine your ballot with federal races and take, more importantly, federal money, you take the strings that are attached. And that's, I think, one of the easiest ways for Trump to basically say, okay, you want to say that this is a states' rights issue. And technically, theoretically, it is. But when we offer you that have of money in billions of dollars, you take it, and we want certain guarantees that you're going to administer elections that have a bearing on federal races in a particular way. Once you take that money, you're effectively waiving a ton of your uh, autonomous decision making on how to administer an election. And so, if you're going to have, I think, an ironclad executive order from the White House or from Trump, I think you need to enshrine your language with as much verbiage related to national security as possible.
Yeah.
Um, and so this opens up a discussion on FISMA, the Federal Information Security Management Act, because elections were designated as part of the nation's critical infrastructure under Obama. And that means that you have to have assessments that are on par with what you would see in the nuclear industry. And what we found is that there are no assessments on the technology because they know if they did one, it would fall so well short of what you would expect in a national security environment. And so all he's got to do is look at FISMA, say, have we done an assessment? And if the answer is no, you have the legal authority through as the commander in chief to shut this thing down. So you're not using another device that imperils this, the vote. And so you can thank the blob for giving Trump that argument because again, it wasn't him that signed off on it. It was Obama.
Yeah. And David, it's so important to remember in terms of federal jurisdiction that, you know, the right to be secure in our vote, the right to know that our vote is secure and reflects our intent is a fundamental constitutional right. You could make an argument that it's the paramount constitutional right because if our vote is not secure, if we don't have power over who is representing us, all of the other rights become basically meaningless.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to recognize that, insofar as the federal government having, or President Trump or the Congress having constitutional jurisdiction in this area.
Yeah.
Well, I
And
think there needs to be, let me say this really
yeah,
quick.
go
There
ahead.
needs to be a predominance in the messaging war
Yeah.
that the federal route that Trump wants to pursue is a more safe, cheap, and secure option. Because what that's going to do is it's going to create equal protection arguments that for states that don't want to get on board. And you end up seeing an election that actually looks like an election. You end up seeing next year that, wow, it's not even close. It's not a 50-50 split in our nation. It's more like 80-20. And if people see that at the federal level, and then they start looking at state races, every single state should have standing to sue for violation of the Equal Protection Clause and follow suit and try to do it like Trump, I think, is going to do it. The question is, when is he going to pull the trigger? And I've worked with several groups behind the scenes that are all fashioning kind of their version of the dream executive order and having it harmonize with the law that's on the books now. So it's not perfect because you are going to need some type of congressional um, work that's done over the next 2 years to codify what Trump's going to try to achieve through an executive order. And so it's really encouraging, but you need as much runway to get people on board to actually conduct an election. And so the people that I've talked to, that you basically have a drop dead date of September. You really can't wait past September to have the issuance of an executive order, and expect clerks who are already loath to want to work on this issue.
Yeah.
They love the convenience. They love the fact that their hands have been held. They love the fact that the vendors have primarily run the elections for them. And so they don't know what they're doing. They're not going to know how to do a hand count election. And so we have to be prepared for those excuses. They're going to be made. Um, what kind of hand holding process will President Trump and Elon Musk, and I think Elon's going to have to be essential. I think this is where his manufacturing brain from like Tesla and cars is going to come into play, that there needs to be a kind of one size fits all setup for what an election room looks like. Uh, I mean, it's not like you have to really reinvent the wheel. A lot of this stuff already exists if you go and do your research, but we haven't done a hand counted election on this scale in 30 plus years.
Yeah. And I think your point about the states, so many states want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to rely on the federal money. They want to rely on some of these organizations that have instituted the steal this whole time, but they also want to sit over here and cry about their autonomous right to get the machines that they want to get and administer their elections the way that they see fit. And it will be very interesting in the coming, I think, months to see how this plays out, because the hypocrisy is going to have to be put on very, very bright display for all
Mm,
to see, I think, with those factors.
yeah.
Chris, you're on mute.
Let's switch gears for a second, David, and talk about Tina Peters and the gross miscarriage of justice that has been. The As you know, she's serving a 9-year prison sentence, having been convicted on 4 counts, uh, centering on the theme that she allowed unauthorized access to the voting system in Colorado, among other things. Um, the Department of Justice has issued a statement on that they are reviewing her case for potential constitutional violations. I want to read you part of the statement and get your response to it. Um, it says reasonable concerns have been raised about various aspects of Ms. Peters' case, the exceptionally lengthy sentence imposed relative to the conduct at issue, the First Amendment implications of the trial court's October 2024 assertions relating to Ms. Peters, and whether Colorado's denial of post conviction bail pending her appeal was arbitrary or unreasonable under the Eighth Cruel and Unusual Punishment and 14th Amendments, which, of course, is the Due Process Amendment of the United States Constitution. Parallel to these, DOJ is reviewing cases across the nation and other cases for abuse of the criminal process. And this review will include an evaluation of the state of Colorado's prosecution of Ms. Peters' case, and in particular, whether the case was, quote, oriented more towards inflicting political pain than toward pursuing actual justice or legitimate governmental objectives. I think Tina has every reason to be happy and relieved that the DOJ is looking at her case. What are your thoughts on it, and what do you think the likely outcome is on her case?
Well, this presents a puzzle because it's not often that the federal government wants to do the right thing. And so I'm trying to think from the mechanics, how does this help Tina get out of jail quicker? Because that's really all that I care about is like just get
Yeah.
her out. And I think the statement of interest does a couple things. One, and I'll give you an example. When you've got a litigant that, for all intents and purposes, you've got to sue because they have authority, and but they're not really hostile to you. You can negotiate things behind the scenes, and not necessarily wait for a court to render a judgment. In other words, you can fashion a stipulated order and have it submitted to the court. Um, there was a breaking headline yesterday with Mickey Withoff, who sued the government over the wrongful death of Ashley Babbitt. And there was a leak that it looks like the United States government is interested in a settlement. You would have never conceived that that was even an option under Biden or Kamala.
Yeah.
And yet that's something that you can kind of negotiate behind the scenes. And so I don't know if that will manifest here in this case, but what it does allow you to do is to have an official position from the Department of Justice, basically saying it is our assessment, not to defend the actions of the attorneys there, that we're actually consulting with DOJ attorneys under the Merrick Garland regime. But we're telling you right now, it is our independent analysis of this case that her rights were violated. That's different when the Supreme Court is doing an analysis. Typically, what happens is everyone hunkers down and wants to absolve themselves in certain ways, and usually in a way that retains power. And so, if you're used to having an environment that fashions political abuse and political targeting, which is the case here, um, you're not going to have helpful people. So you would have never seen a statement of interest to begin with under the last administration. But if you're, a Supreme Court looking at like the equivalent of an amicus brief, and the U.S. government saying, "Yeah, we absolutely screwed the pooch with our advising, with creating the environment by providing NGO type of assistance behind the scenes for these guys to concoct um, a case against Tina." And what do I mean by that? You have to keep in mind that the local district attorney, there are writings and emails where they knew they did not have a clear path to prosecute Tina. And so they were relying on justice type entities to start creating consensus through articles, because there was never a case that like Tina's. It was so on its face, smelled, felt, looked like political retaliation and persecution. And so they'll be able to evaluate a bunch of different things. And but I don't know how quickly the Supreme Court will take up the case. And so you've got the writ of habeas corpus. Just so people know, I've read different statistics, but anywhere from 8 to 10,000 pleadings are at least filed and brought to the attention of the Supreme Court each year. I think what gives this the potential of being expedited is that the Supreme Court enjoys original jurisdiction in certain types of cases, usually when states sue one another or an administration sues a state. This isn't really a lawsuit uh, from the DOJ. It's a statement of interest. So I don't know if this is just gonna. What I'm hoping is that this will put her case to the front of the line, if that makes sense. And if that happens, then I think Tina's in great shape. And I think the best part of this is just seeing how viral the attention is. And so it was great news.
What is the likelihood, David, in your view, that the state of Colorado, the judge, the state prosecutors in Colorado could revisit this sort of sua sponte based upon uh, pressure from the Trump administration,
As in
pressure
this
from the
was
DOJ?
like this was a shot across the bow and we're going to start looking into your stuff if you don't take care of business. Is that a way this could have been viewed by the Colorado officials?
I think the likelihood is next to zero, and I think it has
Mm.
more to do with the state judges, the state council, and the state Supreme Court being complicit in a system that has benefited them. Um,
So they can't go back and revisit this
well, they
without
could.
sort of hoisting himself on their own petard.
Oh, well, they certainly could. Like, right, the pardon power, for instance, resides with the governor. He could
Well,
visit.
theoretically, yes, but you're saying that they're not going to do it if they fear that they could implicate themselves in wrongdoing.
Yeah, so I look at it this from just what can a judge. I mean, look, Judge Barrett, you know, he made his bed. He can't at this point because he doesn't retain jurisdiction while the case is up on appeal. So even if he was in a panic right now, oh, I really screwed up and everyone's going to figure out that I'm a corrupt judge. Um,
He has
there's
no
not,
jurisdiction right now. Yeah.
yes. And the prosecutors, because the jury came back with their verdict and there wasn't a motion notwithstanding the verdict, they can't vacate their actions at this point. It's done. Um, the Court of Appeals, the issue that I've got with them, even though anyone with a pulse would could tell you that there's massive corruption and legal error there. The things that I keep bringing up is that when you have retention elections for your Court of Appeals, and it's usually done through committee or it's like a confidence vote. You put it on the ballot. Um, you have to just take a step back and say, wait a minute, have any of their names ever appeared on a ballot that has been scanned through a Dominion tabulator? And if the answer is yes, there is a vested interest to not do the right thing, because if you unearth this, it's like pulling a thread from a sweater. You keep pulling, you have to start asking basic fundamental questions on whether or not the power of these courts was legitimate to begin with,
Yeah.
based on what you find. And so that's been the biggest hurdle. So I see these state government officials as having little choice but to dig in. I don't see them playing ball. I think they're just going to be as defiant as they were in the ballot case with Trump. Remember when they tried to take Trump off the ballot in Colorado? I mean, it was a circus then, and it took the Supreme Court of the United States to provide relief there. It certainly didn't come from the courts in Colorado. So I think you can expect a similar kind of thing. But the beauty here is that the Supreme Court gets to be the kind of the referee. And if you've got great arguments that are provided by the DOJ, you can have a definitive controlling decision from the Supreme Court saying her rights were violated. You violated the supremacy clause here. You did this. And as a result, we're remanding the case, vacating, directing you to vacate the judgment. And so it's coming from on high. And at that point, I don't see them having much of a choice.
Rats on a sinking ship.
Yeah.
I'm looking
Now,
forward to.
I would love to see them wanting to save themselves,
Hmm.
and but the easiest way, of course, would be Governor Polis, um, being under tremendous pressure. And we've kind of wargamed this, maybe even on this show last time I was here, that if you're doing this national review of cases and you're putting a freeze on NGO funding through USAID, and everyone's sitting there going, "What are you talking about USAID? This is Colorado. What does this have to do with foreign funding?" Well, what you'll find is that a lot of the spending habits that we're seeing seem to be non fungible, in the sense that you can have a state bar or an American Bar Association that's writing an article about criminal justice in a different country, but they still have that money that they can use and deploy stateside. And so a lot of these NGOs that are adjacent to criminal justice, I mean, they're being evaluated in a way where we're finding just wholesale fraud, waste, and abuse. So if Doge and Trump can say you're not getting another penny until we've conducted an audit, I've long maintained that they should have been doing this on some of the state organizations or administrations, saying, look, you're not getting another penny, and you're going to see the violent reaction, because a lot of prosecutor positions in particular are funded purely through federal grants.
Yeah.
You know, you basically would have, you know, 100 attorneys likely on the chopping block if they pause the funding. And you just tell them, like, we're pausing your funding because Tina's case is representative of, you know, a dozen cases that we've seen in Colorado, if that's true. And if you want the spigot to come back on, we need to see corrective measures on your end. We're not telling you what to do, but, you know, wink, wink, nod, nod. A pardon would go a long way.
Yeah.
So, meaning that, like, for instance, the Colorado Bar Association, it would be one of those organizations that may be found having backdoor reception of USAID funds. Um,
Yeah, well, I tell you what, I'm speculating on the state bars. What I can tell you is that the American Bar Association, it's
yeah,
been all but confirmed that they are recipients of USAID. And so I've been looking at New Mexico in particular to see how their funding sources, and you have to kind of go through, you know, 4 or 5 different shells to get an answer of where the money really comes from. So I wouldn't doubt it. And the reason why I wouldn't doubt it is that if you look in just about every state, you'll see that there are these huge social justice DEI reforms that
yeah,
are happening, and they're happening extrajudicially, meaning they're not happening through a particular case where a precedent is being, you know, crafted by a judge. You'll have judges that will sua sponte say, based on, you know, our commitment to diversity, you're going to respect the pronouns of an attorney in your courtroom or a client if they want to be referred to as they them. You're going, where in the world did that come from?
yeah,
And Chris will get this because in um, academic circumstances, there's this case called Daubert. Every state has a version of the Daubert standard, which is peer-reviewed academic literature that you go through to qualify certain experts to give an expert opinion, and you go through a whole series of hurdles in a case to qualify something that is credible. And I've long maintained that the DEI woke critical race theory would not survive the Daubert standard. There's no bearing in actual academic scientific literature. So you have to ask yourself the question, how in the world can a court wholesale impose something that doesn't even meet your own legal standards on attorneys throughout this unless there's some funding initiative behind it to make it happen? And so, you know, I'm kind of ferreting this out because I'm dealing with, you know, as we're talking about Tina Peters, I can give you breaking news. One of the reasons why I've been so quiet on social media, at least for me lately, is that my visit to Tina in January, where I got to see her in person, um, created grounds for another complaint and investigation against my license. And so I'm going through a preliminary investigation right now for the 6th time since 2020, based on visiting Tina under what they would call false pretenses. Basically, I should have let everyone know that I was going to record Tina and have this viral video. Like I had the foreknowledge that somehow this was going to happen. And so I've, you know, had to labor through a response, and there's no rules that prohibit it, and I document everything, identify the chain of command, the people that I spoke with, and in fact, attorneys take recorded statements from clients all the time, and there's no prohibition from outsiders if they want to do a video visitation using their computers. There's no prohibition on them doing a screen capture. Um, they're in this really weird position though because they know she's high profile. They don't want people bringing exposure to her conditions, and a relation of the New Mexico Secretary of State, Maggie Toulouse Oliver, was the person that filed this complaint against me. So it's a giant waste of time. I get drugged through this process, and when you start looking at the funding matrices, I think where I'm going to try to put a bow on this whole thing is that you've got funding sources to the bar, which is overseeing an investigation into me. You've got those same funding sources for propaganda media that proliferate thousands of stories about me uh, so you see what I'm getting at here? You can
Yeah.
craft the narrative about someone. You can drag them into a quasi tribunal that's funded by the same entities, and you find out that the money that's being used to accomplish both, guess where it comes from?
All
It
the
comes
same
from
pot.
you. It comes from me. It's laundered money that's subsidized from the taxpayer, basically, sent off to Ukraine or FTX or some type of entity like that. And it's not like you've got George Soros even footing the bill anymore. It's the American people.
Yeah.
So I've been scratching my head at a lot of these entanglements, because they're personal.
Yeah.
But even visiting Tina Peters, that has tied me up for weeks now.
Well,
And
the
you
whole
did absolutely, and you did excuse me, Danielle, but you did absolutely nothing wrong. I mean, it's like the way you just described this. This is just, you know, an exercise in frivolity. It would be comical if it didn't require such an immense expenditure of your time and your energy to respond to it. It would be absolutely comical. But the
but
system in Colorado, yeah, go ahead, Danielle.
what I think is even more beautiful about this, and David, I hate that the pain and the suffering and the time that you have to put into this, but I have for a long time looked at the medical boards, looked at the bar associations, and said these places are so rife with corruption. Where do we even start untangling this? And so, if they are the ones causing you the pain that causes them to be found out, I can't wait for that to get unraveled because they
Well,
deserve it. They deserve it.
there is a gentleman that's helping me explain the story, because it's not just the sixth complaint. You'll find out the guy that filed the complaint against me this last time was the first person that filed a complaint against me years ago, after I did the Cyber Symposium. Basically, as soon as I walked off the stage, there was a complaint with the Supreme Court of my state, and it on its face. So I have gone through the conflicts of the investigators. I've located emails where they were communicating with complainants weeks in advance of them actually filing a complaint, which violates all kinds of ethical rules and procedures. And and I think in some ways I've been um, held afloat because of how comedic. I mean, how comedic some of these complaints are. Like when you look at them, like, there was a time where if I would have opened that confidential envelope from the Supreme Court, that your heart would race, and you're sitting there going, "This could be it." And I open and I look at them, and it's so objectively easy to identify the political retaliation that's going on here. The last complaint, I might have even shared this with you, was by an occultist that had a website, and she had tarot card readings for the demise of my wife and I.
Oh my
And we
gosh.
found it, and we were able to bring that to the board's attention. Now, what did they do? They should have, done some rudimentary screening to not let that even come through the door to, subject me to spending time to basically investigate things for them. But they don't do that. And so when I brought it to their attention, you would think you'd get a formal letter, because you're supposed to, saying we've evaluated these things, have this complaint go away. Um, what you'll find is that they never put a formal ruling on this complaint filed by this occultist. And it was embarrassing when you start reading some of the stuff that we screen captured and submitted to the Bar Association. You know that they were absolutely embarrassed by the fact that they gave it life. And so, but how do you get your pound of flesh?
Yeah.
You don't say anything. And that presents different challenges for me, because if I don't get formal resolution, guess what I have to tell potential clients? I'm still under investigation. I've been under investigation based on either them not giving me rulings or leaking advisory opinions that don't disbar me, but they still, have inflammatory findings
Sure.
that, perhaps I need to be investigated by the FBI. That's in one of the advisory opinions. Like, we're not ready to disbar him. And so you go through the process, and I have to tell my clients that I'm under investigation, because it has a direct bearing if you do, a Google search, and a judge will do that. The attorneys do it. We do it with everyone that we go against. We go to their website, we try to figure out more
Sure.
about them because we want to help our clients. Well, just think of the circus that I've got, and I've looked through Google alerts, and I think right now I stopped counting. There's about 1,000 hit pieces where if you put my name in it, you'll find it, and some really really bizarre things like word for word, an article that was put out by the Washington Post appears in a Malaysian newspaper, word for word. A local journalist here in my own hometown, word for word, her article would show up in a Clemson student newspaper in South Carolina. And so, what I'm saying is that these aren't unique stories. I think what you're seeing is just like you've got machine algorithms that can divvy up your Smurf money for donor mules. You'll have the same ability to proliferate the same article in 50 different states with different publishers that are
Wow.
all part of this USAID internews blob of thousands and thousands of people that are on the take. And that was pretty, um, it was enlightening because there was a time where I thought these were more or less organic. I mean, I had a sense that they're coordinating, but
Yeah.
not to the degree that someone could just press a button and that story would show up across the country.
Yeah.
And so when you realize that there, you really have no shot against these intelligence-backed news propaganda rags. But now I feel better about it because there's a level of exposure going on with Elon Musk that I didn't conceive of. I didn't think this day would happen. And now I can look back and do research on all of these articles. I'm sitting there going, this is all fake. This is all manufactured through these same NGOs.
And David, when you look at what's happened to you through this coordinated hit, is there still a space for a bar association after all of this? Whenever all is said and done, what would that look like? What governance of attorneys and judges look like to you?
I I struggle with this because there's going to be a segment of your audience because I've come into contact with this type of audience where they kind of go full on tinfoil, um, kind of lunatic with what the bar is and what it isn't. So there's arguments that it's controlled by the crown. So depending on how far you go back, and I'm not saying that that might not be true. What I'm saying is I was born like well after this whole system was set up. And what you're going to find is every industry, every profession to some degree has been tainted. And so on the one hand, there's almost like this romantic idea that, you know, we're all kind of agents for, corrupt kings and queens. And I certainly haven't been given the royal treatment. All I know is that in order to pass through the bar, that barrier and represent other people, I got to be licensed. And if any of these common law advocates can point to a single case where people that weren't licensed were able to get relief on behalf of clients, I would love to hear about it, but I haven't seen it. Um, so that's just a frustration. But what I will share with you is that I don't think that the Bar Association is necessary. Um, basically you're paying dues, you're paying fees, um, and most of the products or things that are being offered can be offered through the private sector without need of a formal organization. It's not unusual to have CLEs, continuing legal education, to keep your license. I mean, that's required, and so they help facilitate you getting um, access to classes and things like that. So, but I don't see that as being essential to, like, you could get that any which way that you want, and they're it's always been a self-regulating profession. So I guess there's money that they need to ensure that if there is a disciplinary process, you can pay your hearing officers to scrutinize facts. And um, I don't know. I guess my answer to that is that I I have been paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars every year and funding the very people that are presiding over my case. I
Yeah.
have funded my own opposition. So I'm probably too close to the problem to answer that in a way that doesn't have bias, but these people loathe me. Um, I've had zero value from my license over the past 4 years because I can't practice in a meaningful way. I practice with patriots, and we're going to win. But if you're asking me if I can see the utility of the bar association, I am a hard no on on their existence.
Yeah. David, you know, what is so unfortunate about what you've been through and are going through is any objective person, screener who looks at these cases should, after a cursory review, say there's nothing here. There's not even a prima facie case here. This needs to be dismissed. We're going to send notice to Mr. Clements that this is dismissed because it has simply no merit. Not only do they not do that, which is really incumbent upon them as organs of at least putative justice in our society with enormous power, not only do they not do that, they really go 360 degrees in the other direction and do all they can to try to fabricate something against you. And even as you said, when in the end it goes away, not formally, unfortunately, but they get quiet and you're able to manage and move on, there's zero accountability for what they've done. You know, Ray Donovan said after he was acquitted in a major jury trial in the 80s, someone who worked in the Reagan administration, he said, "Yes, I'm acquitted, but where do I go to get my energy back? Where do I go to get my resilience back? Where do I go to get my hope back? To the extent that my reputation has been damaged, where do I go to get my reputation back?"
Mm.
And that is what is so extraordinarily sad about this. The fact that they are so corrupt, they don't close this crap down on the front end. They do just the opposite. And in the end, there's zero mechanism of accountability for them. That has got to change. It has to change because you're entitled. Not only are you entitled all this bullshit, excuse my language, to go away, you're entitled to retribution and restitution in your own right.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what makes it even more frustrating is I know that complaints have been filed against attorneys in the government for legitimate purposes. There was a county attorney um, named R.B. Nichols that was working against our audit in Otero County. He was the county attorney, and we found out that behind the scenes he was working with um, these political operatives to tank the audit, and he was creating documents to censure me um, because of our canvassing efforts. And so, just so people know, part of our audit we would do door-to-door canvassing, and it was by the book, and it was wonderfully done. And so, what you would do is, if you're political operative, is you'd fabricate an encounter that never happened. You'd have someone with blue hair do a TikTok video, and after the fact, say, "You wouldn't believe it. What just happened at the door?" And they'd just make stuff up. And then the Daily Beast would pick up that TikTok video, all orchestrated. They publish it. Then Congress would use the Daily Beast argument to basically launch an investigation into our audit to shut it down. And they would issue subpoenas for all communications between me, my wife, everyone else. Um, and you'd find out, like, okay, this is all crap. And yet the attorney has a formal censure ready to go. He's not that smart. Where is he getting the ideas to have a county meeting? And we are able to shut down that censure by showing up, driving 2 hours, because we learned that there was a draft of it leaked through the newspaper. So no matter what, we were condemned by the draft and the intention of rebuking our audit. And we were able to have the commission rescind that through playing voicemail after voicemail of death threats that were left on my wife's phone. I'm like, you want to, here's the proof. And we were able to figure out that the person that created and fabricated the TikTok video was one of the people that left death threats. We submitted it to the FBI. So the whole thing fell apart. It was through God's grace that we were able to expose the whole thing. But it's clear that that was blatant misconduct on behalf of RB Nichols to work with these operatives behind the scenes to do this to me. And do you think he had to
Let me
answer
guess, no accountability whatsoever.
everything that you just talked about that I should have been afforded? Um, there was no investigation. It was dismissed. There were similar charges against, I think, Raul Torres, who's a Soros-backed guy. And I brought up misconduct charges against the hearing officers in my last complaint because they've been conflicted out. And when I saw those emails of them communicating with political operatives weeks in advance of them filing a complaint against me, I'm like, how is this not misconduct? Well, they investigate themselves and they found that they did nothing wrong. They investigate the Soros
Wow.
funded people. They did nothing wrong. They investigated the guy that's working with political operatives to ruin my name. And yet I get drugged through a process from occultists with tarot card readings and all of this nonsense. And again, it's really the punishment is the process. And once you figure out, oh, that's why they're doing it. It's
I
not
love
because
that
of their
expression, David. The punishment is the process. The punishment is their pound of flesh. They don't ultimately care whether or not anything ultimately sticks because they know that they are, again, depleting your energy and your resources and your hope. At least they think they are.
yeah.
But if I know you, nobody will ever steal your hope.
Well, I'll tell you this, it is getting old. this is
Yeah.
I mean, this is just ridiculous. And the other thing that I've been working on behind the scenes, I do a lot of legal work where a lot of dear friends are in the crosshairs. Either they're being nickeled and dimed on contempt charges for not divulging whistleblowers and sources that have helped us learn about the elections. And so, just like a corrupt mafia, they work with the judges and say, "Give us your source." It's like, we're not going to give you our source. We've got legal grounds for why we won't divulge it. It doesn't matter. And if you don't do it, you're going to get hit with $300 a day and a fine up to $1,000. And Joe Altman is a dear friend of mine that's been dealing with that behind the scenes. His case has been momentarily stayed through the Court of Appeals, but it's I've got a lot of different pokers in different fires because there's so few people that are willing to stand together. Um, and it's not just me. I mean, Sidney Powell escaped um, uh, bar complaints in Texas only to have one filed in Michigan, which is Dana Nessel country. Uh, you know, John Eastman, who I would refer to as someone who is wildly more capable than I am as far as just the constitutional mind that he has, uh, to be have recommendations to lose your license in California, where he was a law professor. Ken Paxton, people forget that the impeachment proceedings in Texas came about immediately after he started scrutinizing mail-in ballots
Yeah.
in his state. Jeff Clark, praise God, he was able to get back within the Trump administration, so he's not hurting from a job standpoint, but he was put through his paces. And I don't have the relationships that these guys have. I mean, these guys have kind of been pillars in the Trump world. So I'm still kind of just punching it out here in the desert. And, you know, I thrive in environments like this. It's kind of weird. There's kind of this weird kind of sickness where um, I do enjoy the fight, but my wife certainly doesn't like them spending time, more time dealing with this stuff. My kids come in and ask, "How's the complaint going?" And, checking out my responses, and um, so I guess I'm just, it's easier now just because I see that there are victories, and but I just haven't experienced personally that that restoration or there hasn't been the requisite articles that have gone out there saying Clements got screwed. And until that happens, I'm kind of left in limbo as an attorney. There's not really a whole lot that I could do other than uh, stop doing election work and stop doing advocacy for J6ers, which has been unpaid. And I could earn a living representing, drunk drivers. Like if that's what God wants me to do with the rest of my life, there is a place out there where I could represent the true deplorables of my community, and do criminal defense work. And it might come to that. I hope it doesn't, but that's kind of what's been done is my profession as a professor. There's no way a school would, even if they were sympathetic, even if it's a Hillsdale or a Liberty, you have to understand that if I applied and they considered it, the amount of intensity and scrutiny that would just be thrown at them by these fake media outlets, it's a non-starter. And so it's going to require a victory from the Trump administration. One of the reasons why I'm so dug in on elections is that um, I know the future of my family depends on a successful Trump administration. I mean, I can't act like it doesn't, and I need the next guy that shows up after him to continue those efforts. Um, so it's I feel like I'm built for it, but I'm there's times where I want to weep. I mean, it's like you just sit there going, it's like I can deal with it, but it's not. This is not what I expected. When I got to the top of my career, I thought, okay, finally, I get to experience life with some work-life balance, and it just seems like it never ends. So I'm trying to be a happy warrior, but I'd be lying to you if I said that this is easy.
Yeah. And David, it's easy for me to sit over here and say that your day's coming, that your restitution is coming. And I can't prescribe what that might look like, but I do believe that it is coming. I do believe that you will see justice, and you will get to the other side of this. And I think you're right in diagnosing that it's going to take some really big fish have to fry for that to happen in a meaningful way for you. But I
Well, I
I
had
think
I
that's
had a
coming.
podcast yesterday, and it was all spiritual stuff. It was all like just gospel. Every once in a while, I get a break from the election stuff, and he asked a very similar question, and so I've given thought about it on what a victory looks like, and um, I think what God's put on my heart is um, for Christians that the highest reward is to be like your Savior. I mean, to model and emulate the sacrificial love of Christ. And so he wants what a lot of people that love me want. They want the seasons of like healing. And that's great. And then I'm sitting there looking at the story of Paul. I'm like, where was his season of healing? So there are certain people that I think it's perfectly normal to want that, and I want that, but you also have to be okay that um, this life that we live is pretty finite in the grand scheme of things. And so my prayer is not necessarily for restoration. It's just whatever that I'm dealing with to wear it well, and in the hopes that there's a divine payoff, even if I don't see it now. And I say this um, not because I don't have faith that He can do great things in the here and now. It's just I think it's just a great and it's a healthier place for me to be, to not be resentful. And
Yeah.
so people wonder, like, how in the world am I not angry and resentful all the time? It's because I'm really trying my best to study the true heroes of the faith that didn't get their Hollywood ending, and that's really special. I mean, if that's something that is in my future, I'm okay with that too. But it's um, but there's a lot of internal reflection. Let's just put it that way, on being okay with having a version of you that's out there in the public eye that's not remotely true, and it requires a great deal of faith to just say, okay, I really need to believe that all that matters is what God thinks of me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah.
David, do you, you know, every time I talk to you, every time Daniel and I interview you, I always have the appreciation that you view temporal affairs, particularly your own experiences in this world of persecution and hardship and unfair retaliation, through a spiritual prism, and through really the lens not of temporal justice, but ultimately of eternal justice. And I'm reminded of what St. James said, and Jesus himself said, when he said, "Blessed are you when they insult you and castigate you and ridicule you and spread all kinds of malicious things about you for my name's sake, for great is your reward in heaven." Um, I can't imagine, even in my own life, and some of the injustice that I've experienced, both in my practice and in my life personally. I can't imagine how I would be able to sustain life, any degree of joy, without a deep conviction that Christ does see, He does know what is occurring, and He will honor my perseverance and my courage and my faith. And really deep down, I can count it all joy, because you said a few minutes ago, it really is a close imitation of Jesus himself. I mean, who is the perfect example of one who endured, extraordinary hardship and reprisal, and just the ultimate humiliation? Our Savior, the one
Yeah.
after whom we're supposed to model our lives. So, really, on a certain level, and it takes a long time to get to this point, but it really is an honor to be able to suffer uh, the worst forms of humiliation for our Savior. And it's just a very powerful testament. Whenever I hear you talk about the things that you're going through, it always affects me deeply, because you talk about your view of it through uh, a deeply Christocentric prism. And I love that about you.
Well, thank you. Well, let me just say this: two things. Um, one, if people have heard my testimony, I come from really, really dysfunctional um, background, and so um, I'm keenly aware of just what Christ did in my own life to save me from where I was. I'm not out of the woods, but I had a lifestyle pre-Jesus that should have left me in the grave, and I was close to it. I had a heart attack, or not a heart attack, but a cardiac arrest from drug use, and so I carry with me a kind of a great deal of um, kind of the sinner's shame. I'm over it, but it's a great equalizing effect for having perspective that I'm not one of these kind of homeschooled good kids that had a great life, where I can really lament that this is unfair. If anything, I can look back at first 20 years of my life and say, oh, how shameful. And Christ is using that. And so, one, I feel like there's an obligation to take advantage of a second chance that Christ gave me in my life. And then the other thing was just, I don't think you can rationally construct a kind of psychology around what I'm sharing with people. You have to have an encounter with the living Christ, um, and when you do, and you're around His presence, you find that His presence is like the greatest drug ever. And so what I've had, it's not so much like I'm trying to just hunker down and try to be like all of these amazing people in the faith. It's just like this is a 4-year snapshot of my life. You get a taste of the presence, and you're like, and you figure out, in order to have that experience, that sweetness of Christ in your life, he requires you to walk with him. And what you find is Christ rarely walks in safe places. He's always going into dangerous places to do saving work for um, other people, his creation. And so, if you want to be a part of that adventure, you have to get very comfortable. If I want to experience that presence and that sweetness, I need to go where he's going. And then everything else kind of pales in comparison. All of these complaints. I mean, at the end of the day, they're pretty trivial. I mean, a lot of it's just kind of this construction of stuff in my mind that I've been told is really important. It's really important that I'm licensed by the bar. I'm not so sure that it really matters in the grand scheme of things. I mean, I want to be okay on paper, but uh, I wouldn't trade the adventure. And I think that's the trade-off, is that for all of the bad things that we're talking about today, I've had a sweetness with my walk and my faith with Christ, and I've had a sweetness coming alongside other people that truly are heroes. Jake Lang, hero.
Yeah.
Tina Peters, hero. And the fact that I can count them as friends, you open up a little history book from 2020 to 2024. Um, I could have had a much safer existence, been employed down the street, and not have a Rolodex of numbers that I could call people right now that I'm truly honored to know.
So well said, David. I think there's walking in those dangerous places brings a ringing out as well of self. But it's so sweet and it's beautiful. And I know that people like Jake and Tina are honored to have you as a friend as well. They're honored that you would spend time with them and care about their cases, because I know that they've both seen very, very dark days. And just thank you on behalf of us who weren't there or who weren't able to be there or didn't have the connection. Thank you for stepping in and being there for them and being a voice for them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, my pleasure.
You may
And
look
that's really
back
what
on
makes
this
this
all,
work.
David.
Mhm.
You might look back on all of this and say that your greatest work was done in during your most difficult moments of life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've thought about, because I get asked all the time, well, what's next? You know, do you want to work here or do you want to do this? And I can say I really haven't been afforded um, the luxury of answering those questions just yet. I just get a sense that um, if if Christ is going to kind of fashion you into tough shoe leather where you can take um, the shots, like you don't just waste that. So I don't think this is just about heartache and
Yeah.
persecution. At some point you really do become immune to it. So I don't want people to watch this and just think this is some sob story. The It's amazing how little effect that the designs of the enemy have really had on me. I mean, I'm saddened by things when I think about it because I really don't think about it, but I think that's a mark of his grace. And so I'm hoping that he can use it now that I'm not quite as sensitive as it probably was 4 years ago to just the attacks. It's like, okay, I think I've graduated, and maybe there's something in the future that I can do now that I've learned um, to not take things at face value, to know that there is dark evil. And I've got to imagine people like Trump who have just mastered this on a level that I can't even comprehend. The reason why they're so effective, and his legacy wasn't done in his 40s when he wrote The Art of the Deal. It's like his greatest contributions to the world have happened in the last 4 years as a man
Yeah.
that's 78 years old. And so I'm not 78, and I'm hoping that God uses all of this in the future, and that these relationships will just continue to blossom, and that we'll experience victory after victory with this larger goal, which isn't really about elections or J6. It's really about um, entering into, um, I think, a kingdom mentality. I mean, really, if we want to have the best human experience, it's got to outlast a Trump term. And so, like on some deep intuitive level, like I feel like the Lord is saying, you got to make way for the return of the King, and I'm coming. And it may not be when you think, but this huge, um, chaotic affair over the past 4 years has been an engine for revival and for renewed faith and renewed love of Him. And I just get the sense that it's not meant to be a snapshot. It's something that hopefully, Lord willing, I can carry until I'm old and gray with my wife. And I have to believe that there's tens of millions of people that feel the same way, that in their own small way, that they're like, I'm going to contribute to this kingdom age. I mean, Trump calls it the golden age. I actually think that we're at the beginning of the kingdom age, where we see believers that love Him taking up the reins in every affair, government, political, schoolroom, um, where we get to experience the best that humanity has to offer with the help of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I think so too. I do. And seeing, I think, some of Trump's picks has been so encouraging because it reminds me that some of these people have been in the upper echelons of the different aspects of society, whether it's finance or real estate or whatever. And it's just it's a it's heartening to know that there are such good people in places of authority, and I believe that there are more rising into
Yeah,
the and
I
to fill
agree.
those gaps.
I couldn't agree with you more. Um, David, what do you think? Switching gears for just a second here, what do you think about any predictions on what Trump is going to come out with when he speaks to the nation? Is it tomorrow or is it tonight?
Tonight, it's tonight.
Tonight. Okay, he's going to speak to the nation tonight, and Trump is not one to engage in any sort of hyperbole when it comes to what he's going to speak to the country about. What do you think he's going to tell us?
I don't know, because there's always this kind of like Epstein, the Epstein file release. I know that's not really Trump's, but it's Trump's, and it was a botched um, release, unless you've got a deeper sense of what he's trying to do. And I think I do have a deeper sense of what he's trying to do. It's, you want to keep these important stories in a constantly before the world, to where a news cycle doesn't swallow them up and you disregard them. So we've heard that Pope Francis is in poor health. Who knows what's going to happen? The last thing you want to do is have this huge Epstein bombshell, and then 24 hours later, we're all talking about what happened to Pope Francis and his successor. And so there's a there's an art to how he keeps things there, and the effect that I'm seeing is that people are talking about it and they're not letting it go, and it's proliferating through all of social media, to where there's just such an intense desire for the logs, for the assassination stuff. And so I don't know if we're going to finally get tonight like a payoff where this turns into an arrest or a conviction or something that we all really want, or if it's going to be another um, tease. But I think when you've got the stage tonight and you've got all of the cameras and they have no choice but to cover it, because you've got all these political figures there, that my sense is that there's going to be a drop that is going to cause people to be talking intently for the next few days. But your guess is as good as mine, because I really think um, Bondi right now is not fair. She's not coming out of this looking great. Let's just put it that way. And if Trump knew that this was the case, how does he go out of his way to support her? Like, if there is some subtle messaging that, yeah, we're gonna have people talking about this, and we're gonna use this as a landmine to expose the Southern District of New York's handling as a basis to fire the FBI agents there, then it makes sense. You know, it's just the way that you kind of create your case for something greater than just files being disclosed. I mean, ultimately, you want to have arrests and convictions. And so, what I'm hoping for, let me just say this: what I'm hoping for tonight is that there is a message that lets us know that arrests are coming. and because that's what we all want to see is some form of justice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you popping your popcorn?
I usually just watch the clips, just take it in where I can. I rarely have time to just sit and watch something from start to finish, but tonight might be different. I mean, I might make the time.
Yeah. Well, and we have to remember, David, that as we close out, I guess here, we have to remember that this is not a matter, and just swinging back to the beginning of the show and Danielle's prayer, that this is not a matter of vengeance. It's a matter of retributive justice, as St. Thomas Aquinas talked about. We have to make sure in our own hearts, as you've cautioned us against, in our own hearts and in our own minds, that we are not proceeding in a spirit of vengeance, but we are proceeding in a spirit of appropriate retributive justice. Uh, and not only because it is important because of all of the injustices that we've seen that have been done, but also in order to deter those injustices from occurring going forward. It's so critically important that there be real accountability and real retributive justice here. So it's not vengeance. It's just important for societal catharsis to let things unfold as they well should and as we know they should. So in that light, arrests are appropriate, and I certainly hope that we get some indication of that tonight.
Yeah,
Me too.
me too.
Yeah.
Amen. Amen to all.
God bless you, David Clements, the one and only David Clements. I've always said, David, look, I think one day you might be a good Catholic. Keep your eyes and ears open, sir. Keep your eyes and ears open. I'll come down to where you are and sponsor you, sir.
I'm already,
I know you
like I said,
are.
yeah, I'm already, I joke, I actually just use that. I know you're ribbing me a little bit, but I make sure that I take that, and we go to a little Anglican rock church there's a pastor named Marcos, and he's actually a true asylum seeker he was kidnapped by the cartels in Mexico, and he's brought his lovely family, and they lead this parish. And it's weird because English is not his first language, and so you're not getting like super intellectual profound sermons, but what you have is a guy that truly loves the Lord because um, he's been saved and he's been set aside. But we drive by this Catholic church on the way there, and I always tell Aaron, are you ready to pull in and just experience it? So I'm doing it just to aggravate her right now.
Thank you so
Well,
much for coming on, David. We really appreciate you. And of course, we had so much more to talk about, so we'll be getting you back on soon, hopefully, to talk about the J6ers and progress there and fights still ongoing.
Amen. Thank you all.
God bless you, man.
God bless you.